In the first chapter, Sapphire was an ink that excelled at getting you to the endgame faster, allowing you to utilize its big characters to overwhelm your opponent through lots of lore gain or resilient stats to keep your opponents at bay. Cards like Mickey Mouse Detective, Belle Strange But Special, and Hades Infernal Schemer highlight Sapphire's unique ability to interact with both your and your opponent's inkwell in ways you normally can't. On top of that, Sapphire also has lots of synergy through items with cards like Tamatoa So Shiny, Maurice World Famous Inventor, and Belle Inventive Engineer. These themes and others that Sapphire holds were added to and expanded on in Rise of the Floodborn, so join me as I show you why you should be playing Sapphire in Rise of the Floodborn. As mentioned earlier, one of Sapphire's major themes in the first chapter was ramp. Cards like One Jump Ahead and Mickey Mouse Detective were really straightforward. Play these cards, take the top card of your deck, and put it into your inkwell. There were also cards like Grandma Tala, Fishbone Quill, and Belle that also gave you ways to ramp up your ink. Even though ramp is such a core identity in Sapphire, it didn't get very many more ramp tools in Rise of the Floodborn. First, we saw Winnie the Pooh having a think who has the ability Honeypot that says whenever this character quests, you may put a card from your hand into your inkwell face down. This is an extremely similar card to Mickey Mouse Detective, the primary difference being that Mickey ramps the turn he's played, whereas with Winnie, you have to wait until he quests. All in all, I think Winnie the Pooh is a fine card to play in a Sapphire deck instead of Mickey because he frees up an uninkable slot, but there's of course the threat of Winnie the Pooh being banished before you're able to quest with him. Another notable difference is that when you ramp with Mickey's ability, the card enters your inkwell from the top of your deck and exerted. With Winnie the Pooh, you have to choose a card from your hand and it doesn't enter exerted. Because you had to wait an extra turn to quest with Winnie, the card Mickey would have inked is actually the card you draw for the turn. So you can still ink that one and it would have the same effect. Or you could choose a card that isn't as impactful that you might already have in hand. Overall, I think Mickey is slightly better because of the instant ramp, but again, both are fine choices for the role they play in the deck. Another ramp card we saw in the first chapter was Grandma Tala, who entered your inkwell face down and exerted when banished. In Rise of the Floodborn, we got another character with this ability, James Role Model. James is a more expensive, higher quester than Grandma Tala is, but for being so expensive and uninkable with below average stats, unfortunately, he doesn't see much play. After that, the next ramp card we saw in Rise of the Floodborn was Mrs. Judson, Housekeeper. This is the card Sapphire got that wants to see Floodborn characters played, similar to how all the other inks got cards like this. Of course, it was very fitting for Sapphire that Mrs. Judson lets you put the top card of your deck into the inkwell face down and exerted when you play a Floodborn character. This is a really tricky card to make work because ramp is normally something you want immediately and quickly. With Mrs. Judson, you've got to play her, then as you play the game, you start adding more ink to your inkwell. Rather than the typical way of ramping, like playing a card then putting ink into your inkwell, I like to utilize Mrs. Judson in a way that lets me run more uninkable cards that I'd normally be comfortable with. As long as I can get up to 4 ink and play her, then I have options on Floodborn characters I can play and don't have to worry about whether I'm drawing inkable cards all game. I'll admit it's a little bit of a setup, but once you get one or even more than one on board, things start really taking off. I view it in a similar way I view Fishbone Quill, a card I can use to get around the inkable versus uninkable restriction, except this one can quest for lore. The final ramp card we received in Rise of the Floodborn was Falling Down the Rabbit Hole, which is an action that says each player chooses one of their characters and puts them into their inkwell face down and exerted. This is kind of like Sapphire's version of Lady Tremaine. You get around opposing characters with ward because you're forcing your opponent to choose their characters. You aren't choosing their characters. It's still a pretty bad card just for the fact that you're ramping yourself, but you're also ramping your opponent, which is never good. The main idea behind ramping is you getting to a higher ink count faster than your opponent so that you can start playing bigger and better cards before your opponent has a chance to create any momentum. One of the other core themes in Sapphire for the first chapter was items, and it got a huge upgrade to this package in Rise of the Floodborn, but the most notable were Popsicle and Gumbo Pot. Popsicle creates a lot of value because it's a one-cost inkable card that simply says draw a card. The other bit about banishing the item to remove 2 damage counters is just icing on the cake. This card basically says turn your 60 card deck into a 56 card deck because its whole purpose is to be played and draw the next card, increasing your consistency in finding the cards you want to see. Gumbo Pot is also a fun new item because it synergizes really well with the theme that got expanded on a lot for Sapphire and Rise of the Floodborn, being able to remove 1 damage from 2 characters for free. Popsicle on its own was a great item to see in Sapphire, but it was going to take more than that to make the item package viable for this set. That's where Hiram Flavor Shim Toy Maker comes in. Hiram Flavor Shim says when you play this character and whenever he quests, you may banish one of your items to draw 2 cards. This card makes the item package so much more consistent because of its ability to draw you more cards when you need to, or save the items if you don't. Pairing Hiram with Popsicles lets you draw 3 cards, and there are plenty of other cards in Disney Lorcana that'll let you get a Popsicle from your discard and play it again to keep the loop going. With 6 willpower, Hiram can be difficult to ban banish, sometimes requiring your opponent to commit a lot of cards just to keep you from drawing cards, and he's doing all of this while questing, progressing your win condition. Hiram is exactly what Sapphire needed to make the item strategy more consistent. Now you can play Ariel or Tamatoa knowing that you can find the pieces you need to make the most out of them much easier. We also saw Nick Wilde and Judy Hopps make their way into Disney Lorcana for Rise of the Floodborn. Nick Wilde synergizes perfectly with Popsicle, allowing you to return Popsicle to your hand from your discard. Judy Hopps allows you to banish a chosen item, and that player draws a card. This can come in handy both for yourself when you need to dig a little deeper into your deck, and for when your opponent has an item in play you may not like, so that you can banish it. Both of these cards work well in an item-centered deck because of these synergies. Finally, for the items package, we also received Noi Orphan Thief that synergizes with items by gaining resist +1 and ward when you have an item in play, making her a really difficult and aggressive character when played on turn 2 after a turn 1 Popsicle. Noi actually blends both the item package with something else Sapphire acquired in their toolkit during Rise of the Floodborn, Resist. I talk about Resist a little bit more in my Why You Should Play Steel video, but basically Resist reduces the amount of damage done to a character by the modifier shown. So Resist +1 means every time a character with Resist +1 takes damage, that damage is reduced by 1. Noi isn't the only card Sapphire received with Resist in this set. There's also 4 Dozen Eggs and Cogsworth Grandfather Clock. 4 Dozen Eggs is a song that gives your characters Resist +2 until the start of their next turn, and Cogsworth gives your other characters Resist +1. Cogsworth is especially strong since he also has ward, so as long as you don't exert him, it's very difficult for your opponent to banish him. Combined with the ramp abilities in Sapphire, it isn't uncommon to be able to play Cogsworth on turn 4, ensuring everything else he plays is more likely to stick around since they'll be that much harder to banish through direct damage. Cogsworth really helps Sapphire allow its very efficient lore questers to survive just a little longer. In the first chapter, we had cards like Jasmine, Maleficent, and Mufasa who all were statted pretty well and quested pretty efficiently for their cost. In Rise of the Floodborn, Sapphire got cards like Caterpillar, Calm and Collected, Prince Charming, Heir to the Throne, and Gaston, Intellectual Powerhouse. With all this ramp and all these items, you gotta also have characters that are threats and can close out the game. Gaston especially is strong and is an exception on something we saw in Sapphire during the first chapter, commonly known as scrying across other TCGs. Scrying is just the act of looking at the top card or cards and picking one to stay on top, draw, and or put the others on the bottom. We saw this initially with Develop Your Brain, which lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, pick one to draw, and then you put the other one on the bottom. Gaston has an even better ability called Developed Brain that lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put one into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order when you play him. Gaston having 4 strength, 4 willpower, 3 lore, and this ability for 6 ink is pretty dang good, and is definitely a good tempo swing and threat your opponent will need to answer. We also got Sisu Divine Water Dragon that lets you look at the top 6 cards of your deck, put one into your hand, and the rest on the bottom when she quests. This of course is like a Develop Your Brain but on a body, so theoretically you'll get to do it as long as you can keep Sisu from getting banished. Another major identity that Sapphire got some major support in this chapter was healing. We can see it coming through in cards we've already covered like Popsicle and Gumbo Pot, but we also received Jasmine, Heir of Agrabah, who not only is another shift target for the Floodborn Jasmine we saw in the first chapter, but also has the ability I'm a Fast Learner that says when you play this character, remove up to 1 damage from chosen character of yours. Then we get the big payoff card that all of this healing synergy is supposed to revolve around, Grand Pabby, Oldest and Wisest. Grand Pabby has the ability Ancient Insight, which says whenever you remove 1 or more damage from one of your characters, gain 2 lore. Grand Pabby has a lot of willpower and lore as well, so you'll be able to quest for 3 on top of all of that other lore you get from all that healing. Something really fun is when you're able to get 2 Grand Pabbies on board at once. Now every time you remove a single damage, you gain 4 lore. One of the last themes we see in Sapphire revolves around the keyword support. Similar to how ward, ramp, and healing got characters with a big payoff or global effect to their keyword in the first chapter, support finally got its version of this with Alice Growing Girl. Alice has the ability Good Advice that gives all of your characters support when she's in play. She also has the ability What Did I Do, which gives Alice an extra 4 lore pips when she has 10 or more strength. This is a super fun legendary card to build around because Alice basically gives all of the other characters what they need in order to help her get that massive payoff. You aren't forced to run a bunch of other support cards since she gives the keyword herself. It's like a blend of Aurora Dreaming Guardian and Belle Strange But Special, since Aurora gives all your other characters ward and Belle gains 4 lore pips when you've reached 10 ink in your inkwell. The final strategy and theme we see in Sapphire revolves around ward. As mentioned earlier, we saw major support in the first chapter with Aurora Dreaming Guardian. We also see some cards previously mentioned gain ward like Cogsworth and Noi, but some cards supporting this theme were revealed in Rise of the Floodborn like Duke Weaselton, The Knock, and Sardine Can. Nothing too special about Duke Weaselton other than he's an aggressive lore quester with ward, so he's hard to target with actions, basically ensuring that you get at least 2 lore from him unless your opponent plays Be Prepared or Grab Your Sword. Similar thing with the knock, not the best quester, but should ensure you can challenge or sing with the knock if you wanted to. Sardine Can I feel like has more potential though. Sardine Can gives all your exerted characters ward. I feel like you could maybe pair this up with a bodyguard build of some kind to make it really difficult to get through their defenses. The item is really expensive though, so you'd probably need a way to play it for a discount. But that should be most of everything new with Rise of the Floodborn and Sapphire. I wanted to go over 2 more cards that were Floodborn but didn't seem to fit into the Sapphire themes too well for some reason. Basil Great Mouse Detective and Cruella de Vil Perfectly Wretched were released in Rise of the Floodborn, where Basil lets you draw 2 cards when you used Shift to play him, and Cruella gives a chosen opposing character -2 strength when she quests. They don't fit too well into any of the major themes for Sapphire, but I figured they should be mentioned as the other 2 Floodborns in the set. Sapphire excels at creating ink advantage through its ability to ramp, keeps your character safe through keywords like ward and resist, and utilizes items to draw cards and support the other identities found in this ink. If any of the themes, strategies, or identities found in Sapphire interest you, I highly suggest giving the ink a try. If absolutely nothing else, they have the most broken card in the game, Flounder, so at least there's that. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, don't forget to like the video, comment your favorite ink if it isn't Sapphire, and if you don't have anything else to comment, just comment Flounder. I want to see how many fish emojis we can get down there. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more content around Lorcana. I've got the last Why You Should Play video coming out soon, and you don't want to miss that. Most importantly, don't forget to take care of yourself. My name is Brandon, also known as B Squared. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.